This video is going to be an introduction to layers and how to organize them and some of the features of layers within Photoshop. If you've been using Lightroom or using Adobe Camera Raw, they're fantastic editors of single images, but once you're in Photoshop, one of its key strengths is using layers to do basically anything you want to do to your image. And so we use layers in a non-destructive workflow, which basically means you're not going to delete or irreparably damage any of the pixel information in your image. You're going to use layers to modify the way it looks, but you're not going to actually delete or remove that information because you may want to use it later. You may want to undo something that you did previously. So using layers gives you a really powerful way to do that. So I just have a really simple little example here. If you don't see your layers palette, go under the window menu and check layers. If it's checked, it means it's in the foreground. If you don't see it for some reason, click on layers and then click it again and it will pop forward. You can see on the right hand side here is my layers palette, and I have multiple layers in here. And so what I want to show you is each of these different objects is its own layer. So one of the strengths of a layer is that you can have areas that have color information or image information, like a photograph, but you can also have areas that are around it that are transparent. Now, the way this image looks right now is we have a white background. Well, the white background can be turned on or off. And so these little eyeballs, these little eyes right next to the layers, they allow you to turn that layer on and off. So when I turn the background layer off, the white background, it shows this checkerboard area. Now in Photoshop, the way you signify transparency or no information is that checkerboard. So if you ever see that checkerboard, that just means there is no information in that area, which is fantastic. That's what we want. So you can see around here we have checkerboard around each one of these. Now if I turn each layer off, notice there's checkerboard around this triangle, there's checkerboard around the circle and the rectangle. What that allows us to do is move these around on this area and actually overlap each other. And so if I use the move tool, and the move tool is the very top tool in your toolbar, shortcut is the letter V for moving it around. And so here I can move this shape around. Now you may see little lines pop on here. Those are just alignment guides, which will go away once I stop dragging. But basically I'm just clicking and dragging this around. Now notice if I drag it here, it's overlapping that circle. If I drag it here, it's overlapping both shapes. And so that gives me a powerful way to make designs and make different compositions within a single image. If you want to move a different layer, click on that layer and you move it around this way. So basically layers will have color or image information as well as transparent areas. Now a layer can take up the whole background or the whole screen, and that works as well, but you won't be able to see anything behind it. So here if I move the blue rectangle, I can move that below here. Now sometimes your composition you may want to have it so that it's in front of something else. And so maybe I don't want to overlap it like this. I want to have the blue rectangle in front of the circle. And so I'm going to drag it in the layers palette up into this area. You should see this little light blue line that's allowing me to, or telling me that it's dragging in between those two layers. And when I let go, now it appears to be behind. Again, if I move the red circle, it appears as if it's behind those other two layers. The way the layers palette works is the layer on the top is the one that's visually closest to you. The one on the bottom is the farthest away. So if I drag this down, it's on top of everything else. If I drag it down here, it's behind those other objects. So just try to visualize this as like sheets of glass that images are applied to. And so you're looking down from the top down at that stack of sheets of glass with images on them. And so the one that's on the top of the stack is the one that's closest to you, or the one that appears above everything else. So again, layers will have transparent areas and color information or image information. You can use the little eyeball to turn that layer on and off. If you don't want to see what that layer looks like, or you want to edit something below it, you can turn it off. If you save it with it off, it will save off. It won't be visible. Also, you can change the layer order by just clicking and dragging that layer in between or above other layers. Look for that line that signifies that it's actually, dragging it somewhere. If you drag this down on top of this and you don't get a line, it may not be in the correct location. A couple other little features of layers is the name. Definitely get in the habit of naming your layers. When you create a new layer, it'll say layer 1, 2, 3, and so on. Just double click on the name, and I'll call it circle. Double click on the name here, square, and triangle. You can do it by color, whatever signifies something that you'll recognize when you're editing, because you may not be able to see a little icon here. You may only be able to see it by name. And if everything's labeled layer 1, 2, 3 up to 100, you're going to have a hard time finding items. Now, these are regular layers. This one is a special, unique case. It's called the background layer. And if I turn that on, you can see it's white. It's the only layer, notice this little lock icon, it's the only layer that you cannot move around, that doesn't have any areas of transparency. And notice some of these other options go away. They're grayed out. The background layer is kind of like the anchor layer. You can't move it, you can paint on it, you can do whatever you want to it, you just can't move it around. You can't change the order and keep it the background layer. Now, if I wanted to, I could drag this up. Well, not in this case, but I need to convert it into a regular layer to be able to drag that up. So here you can see it won't allow me to do anything like that. If I want to make that background layer a regular layer, I just double click and it'll say new layer, layer 0. And now it looks exactly the same, but that little icon went away. And here, if I drag it in between, it appears like it went, the triangle went away, but it's actually behind this full screen white layer. So we have the little eyeballs to turn them on and off. We have naming. We have layer orders here. Just changing the layer order will give you a different look to your image. And we have blending modes here. So here, this is called a blending mode. It defaults to normal, but you can change those to whatever you like. I definitely recommend experimenting with that. When we get into the next assignment, you will definitely be experimenting with those blending modes, as you'll see. We also have an opacity setting, which allows us to lower the opacity on that layer, which means that it makes it semi-transparent. So if I turn these other layers off, notice I see a little bit of the checkerboard, through the red circle. That means I'm actually seeing a little bit of transparency here. With it 100% opaque, you can't see through it. And as I lower this percentage, it's getting more and more transparent. So sometimes you want to, have your images semi-transparent so you can actually see, the layers below it. Here with this one, lower that. And if I move this around, you can see that I can see through the layers below it. Change the order here, and it affects the way the image looks. This one is showing more red on top and blue on the bottom. If I switch the order, more blue on top and red on the bottom. Well, that's interesting. Should have done that. Huh, weird. Yeah, it was just a redraw thing. It's kind of a weird redraw thing. So if something like that happens, you can always turn the layer on and off. If you want to make a new layer to create a new shape, down at the very bottom here is our layers, new layer item. Also under the layer menu, new layer. When we double click the background, this is what we got. So basically it was this little shortcut by double clicking. And we'll get into more and more of the layer options as we go along. But I just want to give you the basics right now of what layers are and what they do. They're not always just rectangles and circles and squares. They could be images as well. So bringing up this image, notice we have a little rose here. I'm going to double click that and name it rose. And so again, when you're combining images, you can actually place them in different locations. If I turn this background image off, notice it's transparent around that rose. So I can use my move tool here. Again, the shortcut's V for Victor. And I'm going to drag this rose around. Now I can give her a corsage. I can, switch up that pendant and make it more of a hanging rose pendant or whatever. And so you can actually go in and really dial these things in and reposition that image information, an image, to give yourself a really interesting composition. So that's the basics of layers right now. As we progress, we'll get into more sophisticated uses of layers and non-destructive editing of layers and so on. But for now, that should get you started.